Does anybody not have a handout? I think I missed a few people. Did I miss anybody? Okay, we'll begin. Does anybody remember what we talked about last Sunday? Anybody? Women. What did we talk about them? What was the theme about women? We talked about women. We're starting off good here. Women in the Old Testament. What about women in the Old Testament? Nice. Anybody remember? Oh, Naomi gets off clean. I wasn't here. What we talked about last week? Yep. Were you here? Oh, man. Feminism, yes. What about feminism? So far, I've just heard like titles. Down with men. We talked about the relationship, right, of feminism and how women were treated in the Old Testament and how we handled that from a biblical worldview. Because there are specific passages in the Old Testament that cause some angst when we read it from our context. Does that ring a bell? What are some of the key tools that I attempted to lay out to you to help us when we come across those passages? Ooh, prescription versus description. Can you give me a quick definition of like what that is there, Carl? Uh-huh. Exactly. Prescription is not describing, but actually proscribing, which is, I'm telling you what you should do. Description is describing what you have done, not making a moral case for it one way or the other. It's just a description. Was there any other tools that I laid out for when it comes to coming across those Old Testament passages that we really struggle with? Context of the time, absolutely, and how that related to what the law of God says. Sometimes we can look at the law of God and look at it from our context only, and we like, ooh, that's a little bit, we maybe get a little bit of a tingle down our back, but then when we look at it from the context of that time period, it actually is way more, what's the word I'm looking for? Way more moralistic than the surrounding nations. Okay, so those are a few. Now we're going to get into slavery. It's actually a good theme because Jordan was just talking about slavery, so it's all linking together. When you hear the word slavery, what comes to mind? Anyone? Yeah, I'm actually going to give you the mic there, Carl. Otherwise, I'm going to keep repeating you.
Being forced to do something maybe you don't want to do or like doing, and then not being paid for it.
It's apt. Anybody else? What comes to mind when you hear the word slavery? Suppression, Randy says. Abuse, Bethany says. Anybody else? Body piercings. Nose ring. Yeah, so that's actually in the verses, some of the verses we're going to talk about today, there's actually like you take your ear to the doorpost and you pound a dowel through it. That's if you want to be a slave to someone for the rest of your life. Any other thoughts on when you hear the word slavery, what comes to mind? Say that again? Blacks. Yes, we often think of the North American slave trade or the transatlantic slave trade, specifically in North America, in the United States, in the South. I think that is something it's not a wrong thing to think about when we hear the word slavery, to think about that specific type of slavery. Because that's kind of what we have interacted with. That's the closest thing to our culture that we have. And so there's some horrific things when it comes to that. One thing that I came, just kind of like a little, there's a few little sentences or ways of description of how that slave trade was from some of the slaves that were actually there. And one of the quotes was that we were lashed until the blood ran out of our shoes. So there was just so much blood that these people were lashed so much that the blood actually ran down their whole leg and filled their shoes. It's pretty drastic. And when we think about that's kind of an emotionally stirring thing. But then when we dive into the Bible, there's actually verses that talk about slavery, and in God's law, he actually can seem to endorse it and actually encourage it. And so when we see the gruesomeness of that North American transatlantic slavery, and then we go to the Bible and we see that God seems to actually endorse it in his law, how do we interact with this? And the world will often actually tell you that the Bible actually does, if we truly listen to the Bible, it actually does endorse slavery. So Morton Smith and Joseph Hoffman, in their book titled What the Bible Really Says, this is their comment. It says, "There is no reasonable doubt that the New Testament, like the Old, not only tolerated chattel slavery, but helped perpetuate it by making the slaves' obedience to their masters a religious duty. This biblical morality was one of the great handicaps that the emancipation movement in the United States had to overcome. The opponents of abolition had clear biblical evidence on their side when they argued." And then another quote from a blog talking about specifically this as well. "One could even say that the Bible is clear on this. The institution of slavery is permitted by God, endorsed by God, and owning slaves can be a sign of God's blessing." That's quite some statements. So I need 6 people to whip out their Bibles. Who wants to be one of the 6? Okay, so Carl, you want to do Exodus 21. I'm going to actually just do this one at a time. That way I won't tell you all the verses and then everybody forgets which verses they're doing. Carl, if you want to read Exodus 21, 2 to 11.
Exodus 21, starting in verse 2. "When you buy a Hebrew slave, he shall serve 6 years, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing. If he comes in single, he shall go out single. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master gives him a wife and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out alone." How far? "But if the slave plainly says, 'I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free,' then his master shall bring him to God, and he shall bring him to the door or the doorpost, and his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall be his slave forever. When a man sells his daughter as a slave, she shall not go out as the male slaves do. If she does not please her master, who has designated her for himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He shall have no right to sell her to a foreign people, since he has broken faith with her. If he designates her for his son, he shall deal with her as with a daughter. If he takes another wife to himself, he shall not diminish her food, her clothing, or her marital rights. And if he does not do these 3 things for her, she shall go out for nothing, without payment of money.
Thank you, Carl. Now we need someone to read Leviticus 25, 44 to 46. Leviticus 25, 44 to 46. And then if somebody else wants to get ready for Ephesians 6, get to Ephesians 6, and then another person go to Colossians 3. Okay, Leviticus 25, 44 to 46.
As for your male and female slaves whom you may have, you may buy male and female slaves from among the nations that are around you. You may also buy from among the strangers who sojourn with you and their clans that are with you, who have been born in your land, and they may be your property. You may bequeath them to your sons after you to inherit as a possession forever. You may make slaves of them, but over your brothers, the people of Israel, you shall not rule one over another ruthlessly.
Thank you. Ephesians 6, 5 through 9. Who's?
Bondservants, obey your earthly masters with fear and trembling, with a sincere heart, as you would Christ, not by the way of eye service, as people-pleasers, but as bondservants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, rendering service with a good will as to the Lord and not to man, knowing that whatever good anyone does, this he will receive back from the Lord, whether he is a bondservant or is free. Masters, do the same to them, and stop your threatening, knowing that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and that there is no partiality with him.
Thank you. Colossians 3, 22, to chapter 4, verse 1.
Slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything, and do it not only when their eye is on you and to curry their favor, but with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. Anyone who does wrong will be repaid for their wrongs, and there is no favoritism. Masters, provide your slaves with what is right and fair, because you know that you also have a master in heaven.
Thank you. 2 more. They're going to be found in Genesis. Genesis 12 and Genesis 24. Who would like to? Genesis 12, verse 16.
And for her sake he dealt well with Abram. And he had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male servants, female donkeys, and camels.
Thank you. And then we need Genesis 24, verse 35.
The Lord has greatly blessed my master, so that he has become rich, and he has given him flocks and herds, and silver and gold, and servants and slave women, and camels and donkeys.
Thank you. So, when we think about slavery, we often think of the North American slave trade, and then we read verses like we just read. So in there, it talks about the Israelites being permitted to take slaves from other nations, to have slaves as possessions, It talks about being able to have slaves of your own people. In the New Testament, it talks about a command. This is actually prescription. Paul prescribes that slaves obey your earthly masters. And then what Jordan and Bonnie read in Genesis, God, through blessing certain people, the blessing is communicated by that they have slaves. So it's actually like a sign of a blessing. So how do we handle that? How does that hit you? Right? We just, in the North American slave trade, they were whipped till their shoes were filled with blood, and here is a God who says, go ahead, have slaves from other nations. What's going on? Does it hit you right or wrong, or I'm trying to evoke some emotion here. I hope that's everybody.
My emotion is that you're pretty brave.
Nice. I'm brave. That's good.
Basically, it's just confusing.
It's confusing. Any other thoughts? Does this make you question your faith? No. Why not, Carl?
My faith is rooted in a belief in God and Jesus and that salvation. This is confusing and uncomfortable, and I don't understand it, but there's lots of other things I don't understand as well. So
that's fair.
I would say at first glance it is quite disturbing, but then when you read God's desire or the treatment of slaves and what that actually looks like in the context of the Bible and God's will, it looks immensely different than what we know from the transatlantic slave trade.
I guess for me, just thinking about the whole idea of, I don't know all the terminology, progressive revelation maybe. Like if you think of, let's say, a tribe living in some country where they're totally cut off from everybody and they're first introduced to Christ, and yet they've been in a culture where this is just what they've done. Like, God's not going to hammer them with every single thing that he wants. Like, he doesn't even hammer us with everything he wants us to do. And so, like, what reassures me that in the New Testament, at least God is saying, treat your servants well. And that shows to me the progression in what he's trying to teach his people in dealing with slaves and not.
Absolutely.
That example you give is horrific, but my guess is it's on the worst case scenario, and it doesn't apply across the board. That's not a generalized statement. George Washington had slaves. He wanted to free them, but the laws of the times did not allow him to do that. So you have to factor in, if you want to stay exclusively with the black slaves in North America. There's probably still just as many slaves now in the world as there was just the black slaves alone.
Thank you, Wayne. That is absolutely true. There is still slavery going around in the world.
And just to build on that a little bit and bring it home to today, I find that unless something directly affects us or is very close to us, we don't give it a lot of thought anymore. It takes that to make us think and work through things, whether that be slavery or anything else for that matter, that if it's not very close to us, that's someone else's problem.
Yes. Okay. A lot of good points. Some of you already stole all my thunder on how we deal with with these verses, but we're going to get into it. I have a ton of verses in the handout. I think with the amount of time we have, we're probably not going to read them all. If you have questions about them, I'll probably pick and choose a few that we'll read. If you don't trust me, the verses should be there, so you should be able to go do your own study based off what I just did in the handout. Okay, let's dive in. So, first things first, prescription versus description. That tool stays the same both for how women are treated in the Old Testament and the same with slavery in the Bible. So, those verses, so in Genesis 12 and Genesis 24, it communicates the blessing that God has given to certain people. In that blessing, it's communicated that there are slaves with that blessing. Now, the question to you that I would have is that God saying that in order, like if you are blessed, you will have slaves? Or is the author communicating this person is blessed, and in that time, in that culture, being blessed meant they had camels, they had donkeys, they had slaves. These are things that symbolize their blessing, but it's not prescribing them as being morally right. How would you handle that? Does that make sense? So like the blessing passages are there, but they're not necessarily prescribing something moral for us to do. Now that I am wealthy, I should go buy slaves. Right? There's not that verse in the Bible.
Just a counterpoint, and I disagree with it, but I think it's a valid counterpoint. When God blesses us, it's something that He has granted us. So to say that this is a description rather than a prescription can be argued against a little bit in that regard. I don't think God intended for slavery to exist or doesn't approve of it. So I'm still struggling with that, even though I hear what you're saying.
So thank you, Carl, for being honest about that. This is what I would encourage you guys to do. Go look at the story of Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians in the book of Daniel, and just wherever that is in the Bible. The reason I say that is because in that, God specifically says that He has raised Nebuchadnezzar up, and He has given the nations into Nebuchadnezzar's hands. So, like you're talking about, Carl, God is actually blessing Nebuchadnezzar. He blessed him. But yet, I guarantee that so much of what he did, based on that blessing, was a sin. So there, just right there, is a story of a guy that God blessed, but he didn't necessarily do that, like everything he did was morally right. I'm going to move on from that point, unless you have more thoughts on that, Carl. Okay. Anybody else have any more thoughts on this? Questions, thoughts, concerns? Okay. Okay. The next thing, just like how we view the passages in the Old Testament, with women, we can use these same tools to talk about slavery. So, looking at God's law versus the culture and what our understanding of slavery is. Okay? So here's some interesting, I have the verses. Though permitted, slavery was very different than what we think of as slavery when it comes to, let's say, the transatlantic slave trade, like Bethany was describing. Here are some things that the Bible explicitly says in God's law related to how you should treat your slaves. Okay? Runaway slaves could not be sent back to their masters. So if a slave ran away to you, let's say I'm here in Lorette and a slave was in Landmark and that slave ran to me to get away from his master, the Bible actually commanded me not to send that slave back to his master. And that slave could live with us. You could not kidnap a man. You could not force that man through kidnapping to become a slave. That's actually referenced in the Old Testament and the New Testament. So those two verses right there condemn the transatlantic slave trade, right? Because how did they get their slaves? Through kidnapping. They would go and get them and bring them back against their will. That is condemned in the Bible. In Leviticus, it talks about not oppressing a stranger or an alien. So, and the alien here is not talking about some green guy up in the sky, right? It's talking about somebody that's not from Israel, right? And that we're meant to treat people, Israel was meant to treat people that were from different countries well, not oppress them. Here's another interesting one. You could not oppress a poor and needy servant. So I'm going to pause there. Servant. We've actually, when Hannah read her Ephesians 6, you notice there was a bondservant there instead of a slave. And depending on your translation with the Old Testament, you'll actually have bondservant and slave intermingled. And so it's actually, the word in Hebrew can be used interchangeably between bondservant and slave. And so depending on your translation, they're actually the same. Which for us is, in North America, we can go, oh man, thank goodness we don't have to use the word slave. They mean the same thing, right? But, yeah, you could not oppress a needy or poor slave. Okay, like how much of this is taking away these things that we have in our minds when it comes to slaves, right? There goes the whipping, there goes all these things based on oppression. Here's another one, which part of what Jordan was preaching on today. All servants, all slaves were included in the Sabbath day of rest. So even if you were a slave, one day a week, you were completely free from work. That was the law. Here's a few that maybe will hit you a little bit wrong, but in that culture, these are a big deal. Slaves could go free. It was by law. The slave could go free if their master hurt their eye, in which they lost one of their eyes, or they lost one of their teeth. The slave could go free, completely free, if their master did something like that to them. How many slaves would have gone free in the South if that was carried out down there? A ton, right? And the last one that I'm going to reference is that there were consequences. You had to pay, what's the word I'm looking for? We'll leave it for now. Essentially, there was consequences if you beat a slave to death. You couldn't beat a slave to death. That was against the law. So how many of these things, how does that change our perspective on what the Bible says about slavery? We could not return a runaway slave. We cannot kidnap a man. We cannot oppress an alien or a stranger. We cannot oppress a poor, needy slave. All our slaves are included in the Sabbath day of rest. If we hurt their eye or one of their teeth falls out, we actually set them free. And if we beat a slave to death, we have to pay to their family that we actually, since we beat them to death, we actually had to give their family, there's a word that I want to say, and I just keep forgetting it. Reparations? Is that what the word I'm looking for? Retribution? Retribution, we'll go with that. Or is it reparation? Is it reparation? Okay. It's an R word, exactly. You can look it up later. Okay, so what are your thoughts after hearing all that? Does that change your perspective on the laws that are being talked about in the Bible? Seems a lot better than what they were in the cultures that they were interacting with. Are you still struggling? As always, Carl is being truthful here.
Hi. Part of what I'm saying here is my own struggle, but part is also what we might experience in a conversation with someone who is using this as an argument against Christianity. So we do hear what you're saying, but it does seem like it's permissible to beat a slave within an inch of his life as long as we don't take out his eyes and his teeth. And knowing how the Jewish people looked at their laws, like their laws were very specifically followed. Like if you spit on the ground and the ground rolled over, then you were considered as tilling. Or if you wanted to travel further than the allowed amount on Sabbath, you would, on the day before, place food out at certain places so that you could go to those places and travel further. So there is still some difficulties with what you're describing, I think. And yeah, we should be mindful of those, and we should know that we might need to talk about these things and be challenged by them by someone who is challenging Christianity.
I have a question for you, Carl. What was one of the big things that Jesus condemned the Israelites on when he came to earth, when it came to the law?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
The condemnation, well, we see little bits of it throughout the New Testament, and it has nothing to do with our salvation. I think my favorite one is the one in Galatians where they talk about circumcision being part of the way of salvation, and if they think that's the key, then they're told, cut the whole thing off. So, yeah.
I think where I'm driving at is Jesus actually condemned the Israelite people because they were doing the letter of the law, not of the heart of the law, right? And so I don't think it's a right interpretation to interpret these verses based on the Israelites' actions associated with them, but we can see from Jesus the heart of the law here was protecting the slave, not hurting them, even though you can take these laws and twist them, just like you can today.
And that is perhaps the most important thing to remember about this conversation, is that when someone is challenging Christianity and saying, well, you support slavery, then this whole point of Jesus saying, you're missing the heart of the law and you're not taking it, that's really important to be able to share that with other people. And that's really where our Christianity relates to, is we're relating more to Jesus and a relationship to Jesus and what he brought, rather than the prescription of the law. And that's what we believe. So that's what we should be able to share.
I just want to share how I reconcile it a bit to myself. I don't purport that this is the whole answer, but how I kind of gain comfort in the whole thing is the Lord blesses people, and the responsibility is on that people to treat those that work for them and with them properly, much like we're supposed to view our neighbor. I don't think he says anywhere in there that they deserve 19 lashes because they didn't listen to you. I think the onus is on the blessed person to do the right thing. So many times in my working career, as I've been an employer, a manager, I purposely would say, I would not say that a person works for me. He works with me. And the onus was on me to make the job bearable enough so that that person wanted to work for me tomorrow or work with me tomorrow. And like anything else that man has been given, we just take advantage and go to the extremes and use it the wrong way. We can talk about, we did today, we talk about cell phones, and name anything. I can name just about everything that man has made that we take to the extreme and almost use to our detriment, not our benefit. TV. TVs become a babysitter. Phones, we can't even put the thing, like I watch my son, every time that thing jingles, it's out his pocket, whether he's in dire crisis or whatever, and name it. And I think God's intent was for those being blessed to take care of the ones that are not and willing to work for that person. And that's my 50,000 foot view. And that helps me reconcile a little bit the rest of the story. I don't know if that's right, but that gives me a little bit of comfort. The onus is on the blessed to bless others, not to abuse them and mistreat them and do what we see fit.
One thing I'll just say, like all the things that you guys are saying right now, speak to actually, these laws specifically that I referenced actually back you up, Randy, and back you up, Carl, in that culture, these laws were game changers for the culture that we were in. And we're going to talk about whether this was the ideal for God, like Emily mentioned. But these laws actually, we can use these laws and communicate how God is actually changed. Like these were insanely good slave conditions in that culture. The verse that Carl originally read in Exodus 21 or 20, I think, talks about actually how a slave would bind himself to his master for life. And that speaks to, well, my conditions are so good. If I leave my master, I'm going to get worse conditions. So guess what? I am going to stick with my master for life. That's a lot different than having yourself whipped till your shoes are full of blood. Go ahead, Bethany.
I was just going to mention that other verse about how you can't take back your servant if they run away. And so if your servant, doesn't like it, they can leave. I feel like it doesn't have to, before they're beat to death, I'm pretty sure I would want to leave. And if you're allowed to do that, then yay.
Okay. Any other thoughts on this? We have more to get to through, so I'm probably going to have to rush through the next little bit, but if we want to talk about it more, you can come talk to me. Okay. Here's the next question. Is there good types of slavery? Is slavery, by definition, morally wrong? Who says that all slavery, regardless of what it is morally wrong? Anyone bold enough to raise your hand? Yep. It's an interesting one, right? I think our reaction is, yes, well, kind of like your initial, like, oh yeah, slavery, it's wrong. But how do we, in a society not built like ours, without jails, without bankruptcy laws, without a variety of social things to deal with social issues, how are you meant to hold people to account and protect people? So, like, what happens when someone kills someone else? Or what happens when someone steals from someone else and is caught? Is there, like, what happens when somebody borrows money from someone and they can't pay it back? Like in our world, in our society, we have things for that, right? If someone is caught speeding, there's a fine. And if somebody is caught and has killed somebody, guess what they do? Or they rob. Let's say somebody robs our house and they're caught. What happens? They get put in jail, usually. What happens if you owe too much money and you can't pay it back? What happens? There's certain laws and things that are in place for you to make up for it. So my question to you is just reflect on this. When we put somebody in jail, are they a slave? They can't do what they want. They're forced to do certain labor, and they're not getting paid. Is that morally right or wrong? And if they run away, they got to go back. Valid point, Chris. Who here, maybe this is too personal, who here owns money or owes money to a bank for a house that they own? Now, my question to you is, are we free? No. We're actually a slave. The Bible actually talks about it. We're a slave to the lender. Right? There's consequences. They pretty much dictate what we do to a certain degree. So my question to you is, if we don't have, if there's no jails and there's no banks and there's none of these things, how are we supposed to deal with some of these situations that we deal with in our culture? Well, in the Bible, part of that was slavery. So in Exodus 22, it talks about if someone is caught thieving and they can't pay back what they stole, they actually sell themselves into slavery. So slavery in this context is actually kind of related to going to jail. Right? I was caught, I did something wrong, now I'm indentured into slavery. There's also a debt reconciliation aspect of it. I can't pay back the lender, so I'm going to sell myself into slavery to pay him off. Right? I can't pay you back, Chris, so now I'm just going to be your slave for the next 7 years. It's kind of like the bank, right? Oh, I don't have enough money, so what am I going to do? I'm going to work hard and pay you back over the next 30 years, fingers crossed, right? So there's actually a societal aspect of slavery that is actually serving a purpose. It's interesting. Herb Vender Lunt, commenting on this idea of debt reconciliation, the purpose of slavery, said, "Remember too that at that time no nation had the ability to deal with people who had gotten themselves hopelessly in debt. So they were allowed to sell themselves into slavery, often temporarily, in exchange for release from their financial obligations."
Just a quick point. International Justice Mission brings this to light where this type of slavery is misused in places like India and other countries where people do go into slavery to repay debts, but then whoever has put them into slavery makes it impossible for them to escape out of it. So it's misused in our world currently.
Any other thoughts on this?
Those laws are for? Do you think that that's why they would have laws like that, to prevent that from happening? And so that the laws that are given are more for the slave owners than for the slaves themselves?
You're talking about how the slave could run away, how the slave can't be beaten. Yeah. Yes. It is restricting the slave masters, not so much. I think it goes both ways. But yeah, go ahead.
I'm just thinking of in Ephesians where it has fathers, do not exasperate your children, right besides slave, whatever. Mm-hmm. Treat your slaves in the same way, do not threaten them. I think that those are kind of back to back. And if the examples you were giving now, it's of people that are maybe developmentally immature, maybe have made some very childish or immature decisions, and if the slave owners are really doing, it's almost like a father job, to help these people grow up. And if they're really trading them, just you could make big arguments about what kind of jails are effective. I would guess it would be very similar to what kind of slave owners were effective, that there was growth and maturity happening.
Yeah. The jail, we think jail and some of our laws are actually very moral today. But there's a lot of countries that use similar principles but totally misuse them and keep people in jail and prevent them from escaping, from getting out ever, right? So it's not like, slavery has a tendency for corruption, but what we're doing right now doesn't. It's different words. What I want to jump to, because we have 3 minutes left, is slavery the ideal? Emily touched on this. Progressive revelation. We talked about it last week as well with feminism and how women are treated. And I found it meaningful, this idea of how willing would you be to have God reveal all your sin to you right now in this moment? Right? I would probably die, or that would be brutal. But we know that our sanctification is a progression, and so he took Israel on a sanctification journey, so he took them one step further. So that was last week. This week I want to talk a little bit, or just maybe bring your mind, or bring your attention to this idea of divorce. This is another nice analogy here that we can get to. So does someone want to get Matthew 19, 7 through 9? Anybody? Matthew 19, 7 through 9. We should have done the sword drill and see who can do it faster.
It's my glasses, not the Bible. Okay. I think this is verse 7. They said to him, "Why then did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and to send her away?" He said to them, "Because of your hardness of heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery."
Thank you. So there's a clear example of Jesus. So the Pharisees brought a question to Jesus and said, "Hey, what about divorce?" And Jesus made a very clear distinction there with this idea of progressive revelation, where he said, it was not always this way. This wasn't God's design, but because of your hardness of hearts, he permitted it. And so when it comes to slavery and that progression, it's not a far leap at all to say that slavery is in that same boat. Right? When it comes to God permitted slavery, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that was the ideal. So I think there's very good reason to believe that the slavery was not the ideal, but it was permitted. That he was working with a group of people that was among nations that were just treating their slaves horrendously, and he gave specific laws that actually prevented the masters from taking it too far, protected the slaves in a way that actually brought us out of slavery in the end, and not the trajectory of our view on slavery has grown to freedom, not religion hasn't brought it down in the Christian worldview. And then the final thing, we're over our time already, but I just want you to reflect on this. We talk about slavery, we think of it in a physical sense, we think of it as that's the past. I'd love to dive into this more with you, but we don't have the time. But read Romans 6. And in that, Paul actually talks about us being slaves. And there's actually no there's not like you were once slaves, you're no longer slaves. It's actually you were once slaves to this thing, and now you're actually slaves to that thing. You once were slaves of darkness, now you're slaves to righteousness. And so it's actually a biblical worldview to understand that we're all slaves. We're all doing things. We all have a master. It is a falsehood to think that we all are free in the North American free sense of the word. We all have a master. Is it going to be this world, or is it going to be Christ? That's it. We will end it there because we're over our time. If you have more questions, come talk to me. Go talk to Jordan. We'll continue going. I'll just pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for your word. Thank you that you have blessed us with it and given us the ability to wrestle with it. It's actually a blessing to be able to wrestle with your word. It's a blessing that it's not just an intellectual journey, but a spiritual one. Thank you that our trust in you is by faith and not by works, not by our mental capacity. But yet thank you that through our mental capacity, we can validate our faith. We love you. Amen.